History is a performance, and the official script, the one written by kings, by generals, by priests, always centers men. They tell us wars were won on battlefields, that empires were built by crowns, that revolutions erupted because of speeches and swords. But if you look just outside the spotlight, into the shadows, you find another story, a secret story. The story of women who never wore crowns but made kings bow. Women who never sat on thrones but decided who sat on them. Women who had no armies, yet who commanded more loyalty than generals. These were the courtesans. The word today is blurred, misunderstood. To most, it sounds like a polite insult, a pretty word for prostitute. But in history, the courtesan was a different creature entirely. She was not a wife bound to duty, nor a streetwalker bound to poverty. She was a third category, educated, independent, trained at the arts of charm, wit, conversation, strategy. She could recite poetry, play music, debate politics, and flatter egos in the same breath. And above all, she understood that men's greatest weakness was not the battlefield. It was the bedroom, not the council chamber, but the private conversation whispered in candlelight. Here lies the paradox. In eras where ordinary women were voiceless, powerless, invisible, the courtesan carved out a realm of influence no queen could touch. A queen was trapped by duty, watched by the court, bound by expectations. But a courtesan, she was free. She could choose whom to favor, whom to deny, what secrets to share and which to keep. Kings listened to her, popes confided in her, merchants ruined themselves for her, and empires shifted because of her whispered suggestions. Yet history tried to erase her, because history was written by men, and men could not admit that their crowns were tilted, not by swords, but by women they thought they owned. They had to paint courtesans as immoral, as shameful, as disposable. But behind closed doors, they feared them, they relied on them, and sometimes they obeyed them. This is their story, the secret history of courtesans, the women who controlled kings, popes and empires without armies, without crowns, without laws. Their power was invisible, but it was absolute, and once you understand how they worked, you realize something unsettling. Their strategies did not die with them. They live on. The courtesan was not just a woman of the Renaissance. She was a prototype of power, one still visible today in boardrooms, in celebrity marriages, in every space where men rule, but women shape the rules. Chapter 1. Venice. The Republic of Courtesans. If there was ever a city built for courtesans, it was Venice. Imagine the 16th century, canals glittering with gold from the east, merchants flaunting silks and spices, carnival masks hiding sins of the nobility. Venice was a republic, not a monarchy. Power belonged to merchants, to the doge, to councils. But beneath the surface, Venice belonged to desire. It was a city of indulgence, and in this world, courtesans became its most dangerous citizens. Unlike most of Europe, Venice did not bury its courtesans in shame. They were visible, celebrated, even fashionable. The greatest among them were not illiterate street women, but educated conversationalists. They read philosophy, wrote poetry, played instruments, debated politics. They were trained to hold the gaze of ambassadors, to soothe kings, to entertain poets. They were companions not of flesh alone, but of mind and aura. And because they were so visible, they became indispensable. Ambassadors from Spain, France, the Ottoman Empire, all sought them out. And when powerful men drink wine, when they desire to impress, when they think they are safe, they speak too freely. Courtesans listened, and Venice became not only a hub of trade, but a hub of secrets. One name survives the centuries: Veronica Franco. Born in 1546, she became one of Venice's most famous courtesans, and one of its most dangerous. She left behind poetry, letters, and testimony that reveal the scale of her influence. She dined with nobles, entertained diplomats, even corresponded with kings. She wrote verses that challenged men to see women not as ornaments, but as equals. And when dragged into court, accused of witchcraft, the standard accusation used to destroy powerful women, she defended herself brilliantly, refusing to bow. She survived because her reputation was too valuable, her connections too deep, her intellect too sharp. Veronica Franco was not a victim of her age. She was its embodiment, a courtesan who moved like a queen. But Veronica was not alone. Venice was filled with women like her. They operated almost like a guild, sharing clients, protecting each other, exchanging whispers. This made them even more dangerous. A lone courtesan might be dismissed, but a circle of courtesans, bound by shared survival, became untouchable. Men thought they were visiting one woman, but in truth, they were feeding information into a network that influenced politics as much as the council chambers of the Doge. Here lies Venice's paradox. The government officially tried to control courtesans. Laws regulated their clothing, their behavior, their place in society. They were labeled outsiders, morally questionable. Yet at the same time, the Venetian state quietly relied on them. Ambassadors' words, nobles' secrets, merchants' confessions. Courtesans collected them all, and the state often used this information. In practice, courtesans became Venice's unofficial intelligence service, gathering intelligence in candlelit rooms while men believed they were safe in intimacy. It is not hard to see why Venice was both scandalized by them and dependent on them. The Republic needed them, and courtesans knew it. They cultivated allure not only for pleasure, but for survival, for leverage, for influence. They wore their silks like armor, their poetry like a blade, their silences like a net. And men walked willingly into that net, because it was scented with perfume and lit by candlelight. Modern reflection, we see the same pattern today. Men still reveal their deepest truths, not to rivals, not to advisors, but to women they believe they control. A wife, a mistress, a confidant, a companion. In truth, the one who listens, who withholds, who gathers secrets quietly, she becomes the most powerful person in the room. Venice proves this timeless rule. Access is power. You do not need to sit on the throne if you can sit beside it. Practical lessons from Venice. 1. Access is influence. The throne matters less than the chair beside it. 2. Charm is education. Beauty fades, but wit, poetry, and conversation keep doors open forever. 3. Networks are survival. Alone, influence is fragile. Together, it becomes impossible to crush. 4. Secrecy is currency. Information whispered in intimacy can weigh more than armies. Venice was only the beginning. Across Europe, in Paris, in Rome, in Madrid, courtesans rose even higher. They were not just entertainers, they were power brokers. Some outshone queens, some bent popes, some changed dynasties. And in France, they reached the pinnacle of influence. becoming the arbiters of culture, policy, and desire. And that is where our journey continues, from the canals of Venice to the gilded salons of Paris, where courtesans became the true rulers of France, while kings believed they were in command. Chapter 2. France, the throne, behind the throne. If Venice was the Republic of courtesans, France was their empire. From the Renaissance through the Enlightenment, no other country elevated the courtesan higher, nor relied on her more. In Paris, in Versailles, in the glittering salons of nobility, the courtesan did not merely survive, she ruled, and some of them rivaled queens themselves. Let us begin with one of the most infamous, Madame de Pompadour, born Jeanne Antoinette Poisson. She was not of noble birth. In another life, she might have lived and died as a merchant's daughter, unremarkable, forgotten. But she reinvented herself. Trained in literature, art, and etiquette, she became skilled at the subtle art of conversation, the most valuable currency of Versailles. She maneuvered her way into the orbit of Louis XV and soon into his bed. But unlike other mistresses, Madame de Pompadour did not simply provide companionship. She became indispensable. Louis was a king, but kings are still men, and men tire of beauty quickly. What Pompadour offered was something rarer. She managed his moods, soothed his insecurities, and gave him not only pleasure, but perspective. She filled his chambers with art, theatre, and wit, reshaping French culture itself. Ministers soon learned that if they wanted the king's ear, they needed Pompadour's blessing. Ambassadors whispered their arguments to her, hoping she would repeat them in the king's private chambers. She became the filter, the gatekeeper, the shadow counselor. Her salons became political arenas, disguised as evenings of entertainment. The irony was sharp. Official histories dismissed her as a mistress, a footnote in a king's biography. Yet in reality, she wielded more influence than many of his ministers. She championed the arts, commissioned works from Voltaire, and even influenced military strategy during the 7 Years' War. France bent in part to her whisper, and Louis, for all his crown, obeyed more often than he commanded. But Pompadour was not alone. France produced a lineage of courtesans who shaped politics and culture. Ninon de l'Enclos, a century earlier, was famed not only for her beauty, but for her intellect. She refused to marry, lived on her own terms, and created salons where men of letters and politics gathered. She trained young women in the arts of charm, wit, and independence. She died wealthy, respected, and feared, proof that a courtesan could build not just a fleeting reputation, but an enduring legacy. What made France unique was its openness to this invisible power. The nobility might sneer, the church might condemn, but in practice, everyone knew. To influence France, you passed through a courtesan's chambers. They were the soft ministers of Versailles. They decided which artists became legends, which ministers rose, and which fell. They cultivated an entire culture of salons where ideas were tested, alliances formed, reputations made. And unlike the rigid hierarchy of queens and princesses, courtesans were mobile. They could rise from nothing, and some did. Modern reflection. The courtesans of France teach us a lesson that still applies. Beauty can open a door, but only wit and restraint keep it open. Pompadour survived not because she was the most beautiful. Louis tired of other women more beautiful than her. She survived because she was irreplaceable. She was not just a mistress, she was a manager, a strategist, a minister disguised as a lover. That is why the French called her maîtresse en titre. Not just mistress, but official mistress, as though it were a political office. And in truth, it was. Chapter 3. The Vatican. Popes and their courtesans. If France elevated courtesans openly, Rome tried to hide them. The papacy, the supposed center of holiness, was in fact riddled with its own shadow history of women who bent popes as easily as kings. For centuries, the Vatican condemned lust and desire, yet its halls were filled with them, and courtesans became the quiet rulers of Christendom's most sacred throne. One of the most infamous was Julia Farnese, known in whispers as La Bella. In the late 15th century, she became the mistress of Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, one of history's most notorious pontiffs. Julia was young, beautiful, and underestimated, but she was not simply decoration. Her presence in Alexander's life elevated her family, secured alliances, and shifted politics within the Papal States. Rivals who mocked her as a plaything soon realized she was untouchable. She had the Pope's ear, and through that ear, her family gained power and wealth. The irony is stark. The Pope was supposed to be celibate, above desire, devoted to God. But in truth, Julia's beauty and charm bent the Holy Father himself, and through him, she bent Europe. But Julia was not the only one. Rome was filled with courtesans who served as unofficial diplomats. They entertained cardinals, princes, and foreign ambassadors, gathering secrets and trading them for survival. The Vatican, for all its sermons, was a marketplace of power, and courtesans were some of its sharpest merchants. One Venetian ambassador once wrote that in Rome, the courtesan was as important as the priest. He did not mean this as flattery, he meant it as fact. Deals were brokered not just in churches, but in boudoirs. Secrets moved from bedchambers to council chambers, and the courtesan was the messenger, the filter, the broker of desire. This hypocrisy, priests condemning what they privately consumed, gave courtesans even more leverage. They knew the secrets of cardinals, the weaknesses of bishops, the sins of popes. To expose them would be scandal. To remain silent gave them untouchable power. Silence again was their most effective weapon. Modern reflection. The Vatican's courtesans reveal an eternal truth. The more an institution insists on purity, the more it hides corruption. And those who know the corruption, who hold the secrets, become more powerful than the leaders themselves. The courtesans of Rome thrived not because they were the most beautiful, but because they knew too much. They became vaults of sin, and men who live in sin bow quickly to the women who hold the key. Lessons from France and the Vatican. 1. Influence requires more than attraction. It requires irreplaceability. Pompadour survived because she was not just loved, she was needed. 2. Salons are power disguised as leisure. A gathering of pleasure can be a council of war. 3. Hypocrisy is leverage. Those who hold secrets of the powerful hold the power itself. 4. Silence multiplies fear. What you refuse to reveal terrifies men more than what you confess. From Venice to Paris to Rome, a pattern emerges. Courtesans were not accidents of history. They were a parallel power system, one hidden from official chronicles, but essential to the way empires actually functioned. And they were not finished. For if France and Rome were stages of glory, then the next chapter reveals their decline and their legacy. Because when courtesans began to fade in the 19th century, the world did not erase their strategies. It inherited them, and in modern society, their playbook still survives, hidden in new forms. That is the story we turn to next. Chapter 4: The Decline of the Courtesan. By the 19th century, the courtesan's golden age was fading. Europe was changing. The Enlightenment had loosened some traditions, but the Victorian age tightened them again. Respectability, morality, the sanctity of marriage, these became the official values of polite society. The courtesan, once celebrated in Venice, once indispensable in Paris, became more dangerous to acknowledge. The rise of newspapers and gossip columns made secrecy harder. Men feared exposure. The image of the courtesan shifted, from respected cultural force to scandalous liability. Some survived by reinventing themselves as actresses, singers, or salonières. Others fell into obscurity. The official narrative of history closed in around them, erasing their names, erasing their influence, erasing their presence. Why? Because they had proven too effective, too powerful. They had bent kings, popes, ministers. They had shown that women, denied official crowns, could rule from the shadows. And as societies embraced respectability politics, this truth became intolerable. Men could not afford to let future generations know how much they had been ruled from behind the curtain. So they rewrote the story, painting courtesans as little more than mistresses, prostitutes, scandalous figures to be forgotten. But the truth lingers, because while the courtesan disappeared as a visible institution, her strategies did not. They simply migrated, shifting form, appearing in new guises in the modern world. Chapter 5: The Legacy of the Courtesan. The courtesan's tactics, scarcity, wit, silence, selective intimacy, became tools used by women in other arenas. The salons of Paris gave way to literary circles, to political wives, to celebrity culture. The courtesan's ability to shape taste and culture was inherited by fashion icons, actresses, and socialites. Consider Greta Garbo, the Hollywood actress who withdrew at the height of her fame. Like the courtesans, she used absence to build myth. She became untouchable, worshipped, not because she was seen everywhere, but because she was seen nowhere. Her silence was her weapon. Or think of Wallis Simpson, the woman for whom King Edward VIII abdicated his throne. She was not a queen by blood, yet she bent the crown of England itself. Courtesan tactics, reborn in modern form. Charm, restraint, selectivity, mystery. Even today, we see echoes of the courtesan in the women who dominate media, fashion, and influence. The ability to command attention not by force, not by argument, but by aura. This is the courtesan's inheritance. She taught us that presence is priceless, that silence can bend nations, that intimacy can become diplomacy. Chapter 6: Modern Parallels. The courtesan is gone, but the rules remain. Today, they surface in new domains, in the boardroom, where women who speak less are heard more. In politics, where first ladies and advisors often shape decisions invisible to the public. In celebrity culture, where aura is curated as carefully as Veronica Franco curated her poetry. In elite marriages, where influence is not loud but relentless, shaping dynasties quietly. The courtesan reminds us that power does not always wear crowns. Often it wears perfume. It sits silently at dinners. It listens while others speak. It builds networks in shadows. It thrives where men least expect it, in the spaces they believe are safe. This is why the courtesan remains dangerous, even as an idea. She proves that armies and laws are not the only engines of history. Influence, whispered in intimacy, is just as powerful, sometimes more. The final lesson: the throne beside the throne. So what is the lesson of the courtesan? That history was never only written by kings, that crowns are fragile, thrones unstable, armies temporary, but influence endures. The courtesan shows us that you do not need to fight for the throne if you can rule the man who sits on it. You do not need to be crowned if you can crown yourself in mystery, restraint, and silence. The ordinary woman of history was silenced. The courtesan used silence as her weapon. The ordinary woman was erased. The courtesan became unforgettable. And here is the paradox, the final cliffhanger. They tried to erase her from history because she was too effective, too influential, too dangerous. And if history hides someone, it is never because she was powerless. It is because she had power no one dared admit. The ordinary woman is remembered only by her family. The beautiful woman is remembered in portraits, but the dangerous woman, the courtesan, she is remembered in whispers, in rumors, in legends, and whispers, more than swords, have always ruled the world.